Making a 4X strategy game set in the Star Trek universe should have been a no-brainer. But it didn't happen till 1999 when MicroProse released Birth of the Federation. And following it, there's been no other game that even approached the genre till 2023, which raises the question, how bad was Birth of the Federation to banish the Star Trek universe from the 4X space? Not bad at all. It's quite awesome, actually, especially if you're a Trekkie, though that's not a necessity. And it's really weird we haven't gotten other 4X Star Trek games in the intervening 2 decades. So join me as I explore the game and we can discover together why it didn't get a sequel.
Maximum warp.
You can choose to play as one of the major 5 factions in Star Trek. The United Federation of Planets, obviously, the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Star Empire, the Cardassian Union, and the Ferengi Alliance. This wealth of choice is a veritable time capsule of old-school game design, because nowadays this same title would have been released as a base game first and probably only feature the Federation as a playable faction, with the others coming later as separate DLCs. Am I right, Paradox and Slytherin? Not saying this is necessarily better, because developing separate DLCs would allow for the experience of playing those factions to be further differentiated. However, at the end of the day, Birth of the Federation is a complete experience right out of the box, and there is something special about that concept that's been lost over the past decade or so. But I digress. The first thing that will jump at you is how there is no campaign. The game comes with 4 tutorial missions that will teach you the major mechanics, which is great and sorely needed, believe me, but there is no story campaign to introduce a Star Trek newbie to the universe. The tutorials have their own separate manual, which I also suggest you quickly skim through before jumping into them if you've never played the game before. Creating a new game is down to setting the technological start level of each major faction and then several different flavors of semi-random features, such as the size and shape of the map, or galaxy in our case, the amount of minor races, and whether or not random events can happen. The maps are then semi-procedurally generated, which is both cool and fairly crazy, because this means in some games you'll be dead on arrival, because your map spawn will be space shit. You'll either be in a corner or placed in a part of the galaxy that's very poor in good systems. So what I'm saying is that not all games are equally winnable. Also, I say semi-procedurally because your faction will always spawn in their lore-appropriate system, and other system names and characteristics are consistent from playthrough to playthrough.
This is yet another example of how our actions have random results.
The 5 factions have very different philosophies and MOs in the Star Trek universe, and as such, they will play differently from each other here as well. This adds a hidden and heavy aspect of role-playing into this turn-based 4X. You can argue that prior 4Xs did the same thing, and you'd be correct on the surface. Certainly, in the Civilization series, for instance, you would start the game with access to different technologies, units, and maybe even buildings, but by mid-game, everything would generally tend to level off, technologically speaking. In Birth of the Federation, the faction differences at the start of the game only get enhanced by the mid-game. There is no technological convergence happening here. Each faction would require the same major resources of food, production, energy, intel, and research, but their faction characteristics will remain the same throughout their development trajectory. As such, the game kind of encourages or makes you double down on role-playing to your faction strengths in order to keep up with your galactic neighbors. Obviously, you can choose to do whatever you wish with your playthrough, but just be aware that some avenues of the game will be extremely challenging to engage with for some factions. The most obvious example being the Federation's ships will never be as combat ready as the Klingon Empire's, and the Klingon Empire's attempts at diplomacy will generally be lackluster.
Good tea. Nice house.
This said, the factions won't behave as even a casual Trekkie as myself would expect. Continuing with the previous examples, there will be situations where the Klingon Empire will ask for peace when they're losing a war, which is supremely unlikely to happen, especially during the period of Star Trek time when this game came out, or the Federation will ask for tribute, which again, not something the Federation would do in the shows. These things can be jarring and are a valid critique from the immersion standpoint. At the same time though, you have to keep in mind that otherwise we wouldn't have as open a game as we do. I agree that it would have been cool for each faction to play much more closely to their TV versions, however, that sort of asynchronous design, especially for a large-scale 4X, was back then quite difficult to approach. And I'm not super familiar if or how newer 4Xs approach the concept, but judging by Stellaris, apparently it boils down to increasing the scope of the game way beyond what was possible in 1999.
I'm immortal again! Omnipotent again!
I mentioned the period of Star Trek time earlier, and I'm referring to what was happening in the TV shows when this game was released. Oddly, or not oddly enough, Birth of the Federation is based only on Star Trek The Next Generation, even if at this point in time, in 1999, the Star Trek shows on TV were Deep Space Nine and Voyager, although DS9 was about to end a month after the release of Birth of the Federation. This is likely because licensing an older title was maybe more affordable, keeping in mind the Next Generation's last episode was broadcast back in 1994. However, this was the period of time when the Star Trek movies were featuring the Next Federation cast, so Birth of the Federation was initially planned to release around the time of the Star Trek Insurrection movie, which released in December of 1998. This obviously didn't happen since the game came out in May of 99. And in hindsight, I think that was a good thing. Not only because of how lackluster that movie is, but also because the movie had no narrative commonality with the game. I don't think a coordinated release would have done a lot for the game, but I could be wrong. If anything, the one TNG era movie Birth of the Federation could have worked with from a general sort of theme standpoint would have been Star Trek Generations, but that movie came out back in 1994. However, to nerd out just a little bit more about the licensing, as I said, the game can only feature things that showed up during the TNG era, which also included the movies, apparently, because that's how we get the Defiant class ship. The Defiant class ship is usually associated with Deep Space Nine, however, it did also appear in Star Trek First Contact, inarguably one of the best Star Trek movies out there, so the developers used that as a loophole to have it in this game.
Yes!
You may have noticed by now how the game interface changes depending on which faction you're playing as. Sure, this is only cosmetic since the options have to be the same, but it just goes that little extra step to help with role-playing and immersion. That said, the Federation UI, which by the way has an in-world name, it's LCARS, which stands for Library Computer Access Retrieval System, and is the actual Federation OS, looks absolutely stupendous, and I can only imagine how dope this game would be to play on a large tablet, cause it would look like a control panel from TNG. In most 4X games, diplomacy is often a secondary type mechanic, a brief pause between military conflicts or a way to keep weaker factions from annoying you. But Birth of the Federation treats diplomacy as a main pillar of gameplay, maybe not fully embracing the political intrigue of the Star Trek universe, but definitely adapting it to the time and possibilities. Every decision of external policy influences how other factions perceive you as well as the morale of your people. The AI doesn't just act based on strength, but also according to its faction's lore-driven ideology, to a certain degree, as I mentioned earlier. Playing as the United Federation of Planets, you'll feel the constant pressure to maintain peaceful alliances, uphold moral values, and expand through influence rather than military might. Though, in order to make this an actual game, the Federation is not as anti-war as you would expect. Certainly, most minor factions will generally have a higher opinion of the Federation from the get-go, thus making it easier for them to become members through diplomacy. And the Federation is focused heavily on research, but when playing as a different faction,
an alien culture has been found.
Greetings from the United Federation of Planets. We come.
Don't expect them to be a pushover or be looking for galactic peace. I think their aggression levels are maybe slightly lower than the other factions, but not much lower. You'll get into plenty of wars with the Federation even if you're not looking for it, and they will show up in your systems with a lot of ships willing and ready to throw down.
Darmok and Zulard at Tanagra.
On the other hand, if you're playing as the Ferengi, everything is a deal waiting to happen. Offering bribes, exploiting minor races, and seeming friendly with as many factions as possible will allow your extended number of trade routes to generate exorbitant amounts of money. For Klingons and Romulans, diplomacy is oftentimes just a prelude to war. The Klingons respect strength, while the Romulans thrive on subterfuge and striking first thanks to their cloaked vessels. Understanding these faction nuances is key to navigating the galaxy. The Cardassians are somewhere in between the Klingons and Romulans. They prefer espionage and sabotage and tend to have higher production outputs. And then there are the minor factions. Over 30 smaller species like the Bajorans, Bolians, and Iridians offer their own special buildings and fleets, but only if you can sway them to your side. Winning their allegiance without resorting to military force is a strategic challenge that makes diplomacy feel genuinely rewarding and makes the military option much harder to manage than in other games of the genre, when you play as the Federation, of course. For the Klingons, it's reversed. If you're digging this video and want to dive deeper into the world of retro PC gaming, hit that subscribe button to get notified whenever I post a new video. Let's keep the flame of retro PC gaming alive together. Where Birth of the Federation truly sets itself apart from other 4X games is with its espionage system. Every faction maintains an intelligence network, and if you're not careful, your research labs might mysteriously explode, your trade routes may be sabotaged, or an assassination might plunge your empire into chaos. Spies can uncover enemy fleet movements, disrupt planetary economies, or even incite revolts on rival worlds. Knowing when to invest in counterintelligence is crucial, hint generally always, especially when dealing with sneaky Romulans or Cardassians who excel in covert operations. There's a cold type of satisfaction in crippling an enemy's infrastructure without firing a single shot. This level of subterfuge adds another strategic layer, making victories feel earned through cunning and foresight rather than brute force. But espionage isn't without risk. If your agents are caught, relations sour quickly and the diplomatic fallout can lead to open war. Balancing your shadow operations while keeping up a diplomatic facade is one of the most immersive aspects of the game. This interplay between diplomacy and espionage perfectly mirrors the universe's political landscape. The Cardassians manipulating minor factions, the Romulans striking from the shadows, the Federation navigating fragile alliances. It's all very Star Trek. It's a type of emergent-like narrative-driven strategy you rarely see in this genre, certainly not in 1999, making Birth of the Federation feel more like a political thriller than a traditional 4X conquest simulator.
But to what end? Why would the Romulans want to kill me?
The Romulans have always wanted to destroy the alliance between the Federation and the Klingons. If Mr. LaForge had killed you, Governor, I think you would agree they might have succeeded.
While many 4X games of the time reduced fleet combat to abstract number crunching or automated skirmishes, Birth of the Federation made tactical combat a more cinematic event. This isn't just a numbers game, positioning, ship composition, and knowing your enemy are crucial. Unlike the real-time fleet battles of games like Sins of a Solar Empire from a decade later, or the hands-off combat of Master of Orion from 6 years earlier, Birth of the Federation offers a turn-based tactical mode. Once fleets engage, you're taken to a separate combat screen where ships are positioned on a 3D battlefield. Every choice you make, from movement to targeting, having consequences. Ships have distinct firing arcs and optimal ranges. For example, long-range cruisers like the Federation's Ambassador class thrive from a distance, while the Klingon Vorcha class battle cruisers are devastating in close quarters. Proper formation and maneuvering are crucial, especially when fighting fleets with powerful torpedo systems that can penetrate shields. Energy weapons like phasers or disruptors are reliable for sustained damage, but torpedoes are where things get brutal. Photon torpedoes bypass shields entirely if timed correctly, meaning a well-placed salvo can cripple a superior ship. Though originally, torpedoes tended to do much too much damage, ending most encounters very quickly. This is where the modding community came in strong and rebalanced the numbers to make fights more balanced and challenging. But more about mods later in the video. In most encounters, you won't feel like you're simply commanding numbers. You're assembling ships with distinct roles. Birth of the Federation offers a variety of classes from nimble scouts to hulking dreadnoughts, each with their own strengths and abilities. Scouts and destroyers are fast and lightly armed, being ideal for probing enemy territory, harassing trade routes, or supporting larger ships with sensor data. Having a scout-type ship in a combat encounter will allow you to see what movements the enemy is planning. Cruisers and battlecruisers are the workhorses of most fleets. providing balanced firepower and resilience. The Federation's Galaxy class, for example, the ship from TNG, offers a formidable mix of phasers and photon torpedoes, while the Romulans rely on cloaked warbirds for surprise assaults. Having a command-type ship in a combat encounter will allow you to be way more granular in your tactics if you wish to. Troop transport and colony ships are not meant for direct combat, but they ensure your Empire's continued growth and resilience. Protecting these assets during war conditions is often as important as destroying enemy fleets. It also deserves mentioning how all the ships are individual 3D models, rendered with the Falcon 4.0 game engine because, again, the combat takes place in 3 dimensions.
Torpedoes locked.
Yes, sir. Target established. They're gone.
One of the most iconic in-universe technologies in the Star Trek universe has to be present in Birth of the Federation, namely cloaking technology. Romulan and Klingon vessels can enter battle under cloak, evading detection until they choose to strike. This makes for tense, asymmetric combat scenarios where the cloaked fleet has the upper hand, if used wisely. However, cloaked ships do have vulnerabilities. Once decloaked, they had better done catastrophic damage because they are unlikely to survive prolonged combat.
They're gone.
The battle is over. We won.
While the game does offer an auto-combat option, it encourages you to take personal command of your fleet, making tactical decisions that can change the course of an encounter. Even when outnumbered, clever maneuvering, focused fire, and tactical retreats can turn a losing battle into a hard-fought victory. Sometimes. It's this hands-on cinematic combat that makes victories feel satisfying and defeats sting that much harder. Unlike many 4X games where large fleets often spell certain victory, Birth of the Federation forces you to earn every win through strategy and tactical finesse. Unless you're fighting the Borg.
We have engaged the Borg.
On target.
The game comes with a random events toggle, and while this can refer to any number of things such as stars exploding or shifting their light spectrum or comets hitting planets, what it mostly refers to is that super powerful aliens will appear through the galaxy. The Borg, though, are inarguably the most iconic one.
We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
And they get their own toggle, but there's others that will simply obliterate entire fleets, leaving the affected faction or factions vulnerable to attack from the unaffected ones. All of this being said, Star Trek Birth of the Federation is not all about ship combat, espionage, and diplomacy. The 3 other X's that make up a 4X game, exploring, expanding, and exploiting, are what underpin the eXtermination part. The underlying spirit of Star Trek shows has always been the idea of exploration, using deep space exploration as a metaphor for investigating and discussing human traits, concepts, and ideas. While Birth of the Federation doesn't go the introspective route, making you ponder what makes one human and whatnot,
Its responses dictated by an elaborate software written by a man. It's hardware built by a man. And now a man will shut it off.
it does feature space exploration. Every game starts on a procedurally generated map and sets you up with your faction starting system, 2 ships and a very limited amount of space to explore. You have a scout and a colony ship at your disposal, and very gingerly start by checking out the nearest star systems to see what you'll find. You can find useless gas giant systems, quickly colonizable systems that feature at least 1 Class M planet, systems with great terraforming potential, minor races, or systems which contain dilithium, which will be worth colonizing in the long term regardless what their population max is. Your immediate goals being expanding your physical influence via outposts and colonized systems as much as possible before you start meeting the other major factions. This rapid initial expansion is quite important because once you do start meeting the other major factions, unless you're ready to fight them for territory, that will tend to be the limit of your domain going into the mid-game. If you manage to have enough high population systems and several dilithium mining ones, you'll be well set to shift into a more combat-oriented stance from the mid-game onwards, because expansion will only be possible through conflict. Otherwise, you could try defending your territory and hope the other factions take each other out until only a couple weakened factions remain for you to mop up. Though depending on your map spawn point as well as the RNG of systems makeup and the presence of minor races, some games will be lost well before you reach turn 100.
And you people, you're all astronauts on some kind of Star Trek.
The game's music is great at forming a spacious soundscape, pun intended, which feels grand while avoiding being intrusive or overwhelming.
Sorry.
Likewise, the voice work, while limited, is very well made and thematic, with the voice notifications about terraforming being particularly important.
Terraforming completed.
Thankfully, I'm not the only one who played and enjoyed the game all those decades ago, and some more coding-focused peeps took it upon themselves to mod Birth of the Federation so as to allow us to play it easier on modern resolutions, as well as do away with the slowdown that would originally happen in games that got to around turn 400. Although, the more things happen in the game, the turns will be slower, but nowhere near as much as decades ago. The hub for everything related to modding Birth of the Federation is to be found on armadafleetcommand.com, or at least that's where I got my mods from. In fact, all the footage that I've used up until now has been from one such mod, which allows the game to run in a much wider screen resolution than initially possible. Surprisingly, the base game still runs on Windows 10, but it still has the stuttering slowdown issues it had initially, and also the resolution is of the time, but you could run it for some time, as you can see from this footage. What you can't do is get Birth of the Federation anywhere digitally. So unless you still have yours on a physical disc, like I still do on this wonderful example of late 90s Eastern European pirate compilation, you'll have to visit myabandonware.com and get it from there. But there's way more to modding Birth of the Federation than getting it to run on newer systems and taking out the slowdown, although you can just do that and re-experience the everything from back then. There's quite a lot of mods that add a whole lot more content to the game, including new ship models, events, and structures. The BOTF Top 10 Mods installer on the earlier mentioned Armada Fleet Command website packs in the very best of these, besides the ones that stabilize the base game and make it playable on modern systems. Just quickly going through some of them, All the Ages mod reconfigures the game to include ships and races that appeared in the post-TNG shows, as well as arranging the ships in chronological order, starting with the NX-01 Enterprise as your first scout ship for instance, and then going on through the Constitution class of the original series and so on and so forth. This mod also makes changes to the size of systems, population numbers, and many other balance changes, as well as offering the possibility of generating some massive maps. So those games are going to take many days to complete. Ultimate Mod 5 replaces the Ferengi with the Dominion, and likewise brings many changes to the types of systems and their population potentials, as well as the possibility of terraforming the moons of planets. Mirror Universe mod replaces the United Federation of Planets with its Mirror Universe counterpart, the warmongering Terran Empire. Though the mod seems to be very oddly balanced, because your systems don't generate trade goods when not building anything, so you can't really build star bases real quickly to expand. It's a very odd idea, but maybe I just didn't give it enough time. Then there is the Balance of Power mod, which aims to rebalance the entirety of the game, eliminating various exploits while still maintaining the game's original vibe. There's a bunch more, I won't go through all of them. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a video where I cover the Birth of the Federation mods. Now, back to how I started the video. Why did Birth of the Federation fail? The thing is, I don't think it failed. At least, not from a technical standpoint. The game is more than competent, as we've seen going through it. I played it close to release, and despite the slowdown that tended to happen from around turn 400, that was kinda to be expected considering the hardware resources of the time. What I think happened is that it received mixed to average reviews in a year that saw the release of Alpha Centauri and Homeworld, two other space-themed strategy games, the first benefiting from Sid Meier's reputation, and the second from awesome 3D visuals. At the end of the day, much like its source of inspiration, Star Trek Birth of the Federation was not flashy nor dynamic. and it likely got buried by two very good games that scratched a similar itch. What it was, and what it still is, a slow-paced, turn-based 4X where faction roleplay and immersion are much greater components of its experience than for other similar titles. And even now, some 25 plus years later, mind you, with the help of community mods, it is still a highly engaging and entertaining game, very much worth your time if you're a fan of the genre or a fan of older school Star Trek. If you enjoy this and want to see more like it, click on the video on the left of your screen. If you'd like to support me, thank you. There's a link to Patreon on the right of the screen. I've been Stephen Ansons, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.
It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is not a weakness. That is life.